You know that feeling when you've been hiking for hours and you're looking up at what you think is the summit? You're exhausted. Your legs are basically screaming at you to just sit down on a rock and call it a day. But you keep pushing because you can see the peak right there. You think, if I can just get to that ridge, I've made it. But then you finally scramble over the edge, gasping for air, and you realize it wasn't the summit at all. It was just a false peak. There's a whole other mountain behind it. And honestly, it's even steeper than the one you just climbed. In the world of money, $100,000 is that false peak. We are conditioned from the time we're kids to think that 6 figures is the ultimate destination. It's the number that signifies you've arrived. It's the threshold where you're supposed to finally feel secure, successful, and maybe even a little bit untouchable. But here's the thing that nobody tells you, and it's a bit of a gut punch. Hitting $100,000 is actually the most dangerous moment in your entire financial journey. It's the point where most people finally stop running. They let their guard down, and they accidentally sabotage everything they've spent a decade building. My name is Kira, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others stay stuck in the same financial patterns for decades. I've spent years looking at the math, but more importantly, I've spent years looking at the people behind the math. And I've noticed this recurring tragedy where people hit that legendary 100K mark, and then they just stop. They fall victim to the 6-figure hangover. They succumb to lifestyle creep, and they realize too late that $100,000 is a terrible place to retire, but a very easy place to feel finished. If you're closing in on that milestone, or maybe you've already crossed it and you're wondering why you don't feel as rich as you thought you would, that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to talk about the completion bias trap, the mathematical reality of why the first 100K is a slog while the second is a sprint, and why your biggest enemy isn't the taxman or the market. It's the person you see in the mirror every morning who thinks they've finally earned a break. Basically, the human brain is a bit of a disaster when it comes to long-term goals. We are wired for the hunt. We love the chase. When you're at 20,000 or 50,000, you feel like you're in the middle of a battle. You're hungry. You're looking for ways to save an extra $50 here or $100 there. But $100,000 feels like a round, complete number. It feels like the end of a chapter. This creates something psychologists call completion bias. It's that urge we have to check a box and move on. When you hit 6 figures, your brain sends out this massive hit of dopamine and says, "Good job, kid, you did it. The money problem is solved." And that is exactly when you start making mistakes. You start thinking, well, I've got 100 grand. Surely I can afford a slightly nicer vacation this year. Or, I've worked so hard for this, I deserve that car upgrade. Honestly, it's like running a marathon and deciding to stop and have a 3-course meal at mile 20 because you're close enough to the finish line. You lose your edge. The intensity that got you to the first 100K, the discipline, the frugality, the strategic thinking, it all starts to soften. I've seen people grind for 7 years to hit that milestone, only to blow through $30,000 of it in 18 months because they felt like they'd finally arrived. They didn't realize that they hadn't finished the race. They had just finally reached the starting line of real wealth.
Let's talk about the part of this that actually makes me excited, even if it's a little bit frustrating at first. The first $100,000 is almost entirely a result of your behavior. It's 90% your savings rate and 10% market returns. It's a slow, painful crawl where you're doing all the work. It's like trying to start a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together in a rainstorm. But once you have that $100,000 sitting there, the physics of the situation change. This is what Charlie Munger, the legendary investor, used to talk about all the time. He basically said the first 100,000 is a bitch, but you have to do it. Why? Because that's the point where compounding finally starts to outpace your own labor. If you have $100,000 invested and the market has a standard 10% year, you just made $10,000 while you were sleeping. For most people, that's 2 or 3 months of actual labor at their job. Your money is now a coworker that doesn't take sick days. Here's the trap. Because that second 100K happens so much faster, often in half the time it took to get the first, people get overconfident. They see the numbers going up and they think, I'm a genius investor. They stop contributing as much from their paycheck. They think they can coast. But wealth isn't built in the coasting. It's built in the compounding of the compounding. If you keep your foot on the gas during that second 100K, you aren't just doubling your money, you're shortening the timeline to your ultimate freedom by decades. The trap of the first 100K is thinking you've done the hard part. The hard part was the discipline. The smart part is not letting that discipline go when things finally get easy. Have you ever noticed how when you get a raise, your life just sort of expands to fill the new space? It's like a gas expanding to fill a container. You make $5,000 more a year, and suddenly you need a better gym membership, or you start ordering the appetizers you used to skip. At $100,000, lifestyle creep isn't just a slow crawl anymore. It's a stealth bomber. When you have a six-figure net worth, you start getting targeted by a different class of marketing. You start looking at premium things. You think, I'm a six-figure person now. Six-figure people don't stay in three-star hotels. They don't drive 10-year-old Toyotas. This is the most dangerous form of identity crisis. You start spending money to maintain an image of the wealth you just barely acquired. It's the new rich syndrome. Truly wealthy people, the ones with 5 million or 10 million, often don't care about the image because they have the reality. But the people at 100,000, they are in the danger zone, where they have enough to be dangerous but not enough to be secure. Basically, if you spend your $100,000 lifestyle on a $100,000 net worth, you are effectively back to zero. You've traded your future freedom for a nicer leather interior in a car that's going to be worth half as much in 3 years. Honestly, it's heartbreaking to watch someone trade a life of autonomy for a life of premium subscriptions. Here is a weird psychological quirk about hitting 100,000. When you have $10,000, you compare yourself to people with zero and you feel like a genius. But when you hit 100,000, you stop looking down. You start looking up. Suddenly, you're looking at the people with 500,000 or a million. You realize that your massive milestone is actually just a drop in the bucket compared to the truly wealthy. And instead of feeling proud, you start to feel small. You feel like you're falling behind. This leads to risk escalation. People at 100,000 often get impatient. They feel like they've been grinding for years and they only have this much to show for it. So they start looking for shortcuts. They start gambling on the next big thing. Crypto moonshots, options trading, or some get-rich-quick scheme they saw on TikTok. They take their hard-earned stable foundation and they set it on fire because they're trying to catch up to someone else's chapter 20. The comparison trap at 100K is what leads to the most spectacular financial crashes. You have enough money to make a massive mistake, but not enough to recover from one easily. We've been talking mostly about net worth, but this applies to income too. When you start making $100,000 a year, you enter the world of the golden handcuffs. You start to build a life that requires that 100K salary just to function. The mortgage, the car payments, the private school for the kids, the maintenance of your social circle, it all adds up. And suddenly you realize you are less free than you were when you made $40,000. When you made 40K, you could quit and find another job in a week. But when you make 100K plus and your expenses are $8,000 a month, you are a hostage. You can't leave the toxic job. You can't take the creative risk. You are trapped by your own success. The goal of hitting 100K saved should be to break those handcuffs, not to gold plate them. You should use that money to create a buffer so that you can walk away if you need to. If your expenses grow at the same rate as your income, you aren't building wealth. You're just building a bigger cage.
So how do you avoid the trap? How do you move past this false peak and keep climbing toward real, lasting freedom? It requires a fundamental shift in how you view yourself. You have to stop being a saver, someone who is just accumulating cash, and start being a steward of your future. A saver is motivated by fear. They save because they don't want to be broke. But once you have 100K, you aren't broke anymore, so the motivation dies. A steward, on the other hand, is motivated by mission. They see that 100K as a tool. They realize that their job is to protect that seed so it can grow into a forest. You have to learn to be bored with your success. You have to reach a point where seeing $100,000 in your account doesn't make you want to go shopping. It just makes you feel a quiet sense of responsibility. You have to realize that the boring path, the consistent investing, the avoiding of lifestyle creep, the staying in your lane, is the only path that actually leads to the summit. Look, I know I've spent a lot of time today talking about the dangers and the traps, and I don't want to rain on your parade. If you've hit six figures, or if you're about to, you should be proud. It is a massive accomplishment that 90% of the world will never achieve. You've shown more discipline than most people ever will. But I'm telling you this because I want you to actually finish the journey. I don't want you to be the person who gets to the false peak, sits down, and watches the sunset while the real storm gathers behind the mountain. Reconnect with why you started this in the first place. It wasn't about the number 100,000. It was about the freedom that number was supposed to represent. If you spend the money, you lose the freedom. If you keep the money, you buy your time back, day by day, month by month. The first 100K is a test of your character. The next 100K is a test of your patience. Stay humble, keep your expenses low, keep your invisible employee working, and most importantly, don't let the world convince you that you've made it just because you have 6 digits in a bank account. You're doing amazing, but the best part of the climb is still ahead of you. I'll see you at the real summit.